Welcome to Getting to Know You podcast. I'm your host, Eman Tuzman-Eagan. In the past, we have interviewed members of the Berkshire Hills Music Academy community. Today, we'll be interviewing our first guest from outside the student body of Berkshire Hills. They are friends of music instructor Ben Rosenthal. Our guests for today's episode are Aly and Sam from Art of Ramble podcast, joining us from Zoom. Welcome, you two. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. We're very excited to be here.
Thank you so much.
I'll start by asking you a few introductory questions, and if any of my questions are not clear, please don't hesitate to ask to repeat.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'll let Aly go first.
Okay. I was going to ask you if you wanted to go first, but...
Age before beauty.
Oh, thank you. So my name is Aly. I am from Massachusetts. I was born and raised in Massachusetts. I work at a normal retail job during the day, and I am just a general nerd during the night.
I am Sam. I also, like Aly, am into some nerd things. I am from Massachusetts, but I currently live in Connecticut, and I work in insurance, which is like half of all the jobs in Connecticut. So,
how long have you been podcasting?
I have been podcasting for 1 year. I started a podcast before the pandemic hit, and that sort of got me through a lot of what ended up being at home alone a lot, just doing podcasting. So
I only just recently started. Aly and I just recorded episode 3 of Art of the Ramble. Woo! So I am fairly new to the game. I kind of had an inkling of wanting to do it for a little bit, and have finally taken the leap.
What drew you to podcasting?
So for me, my first podcast was a book review podcast, and I realized at the time that there were a lot of like bookstagrammers, a lot of social media influencers in regards to romance novels specifically. That's what my podcast is about. And I realized there weren't a lot of podcasts. And while I do have writing capabilities, I do write in my spare time, I found that being able to convey my passion for reading was a lot easier to do via podcasting instead of trying to word it in such a way that the reader would understand. So for me, podcasting came much more naturally in regards to that.
So I would say, especially I have been working from home since the pandemic started. So socialization has been different, as I'm sure we're all familiar, at this point. But I kind of was looking for a way to be able to talk about the things that I enjoy with my friends. And once I realized that Aly kind of had the same podcast idea, we sort of were able to kind of tag team it. And, it's nice because then we always have somebody to kind of talk to, but then we're able to also bring in guests and things if we have a friend that we think, I don't know, maybe if, Ben was doing, if we want to talk about McGonagall classes, we'll invite Ben on. So
Actually, that leads to my next question. Why did you two decide to do a podcast together?
It was really actually not something we sort of threw out to the group together. It was like I want to do this thing. And Sam was just like, but I want to do that thing too. And I was like, we should do this together.
Yeah, we just kind of happened to, it came up that we happened to have the same, like I said, you had the same idea basically. And then the hard part was, I think, just kind of getting it up and running. I think, once it was, the hardest part I think is getting started with really any hobby.
Can you tell our listeners what your podcast is about?
So our podcast is called Art of the Ramble, and it is exactly that. It is a pop culture podcast that takes rambling and tangenting to a whole new level. So
yeah, I mean, for example, out of our first 3 episodes, our topics have been late 90s, early 2000s music videos, the Titanic, both the history, the ship and the movie, and then the last one we just did was Star Wars. So we're kind of all over the board as far as we have a list of like all kinds of crazy things. So
we do swear. We do swear in it. So it's not it's sort of smattered in. It's not, unlistenable, but there are expletives in the show, and it is marked as explicit wherever you can the podcasts. So
yeah, me and Ben listened to one in class, and it was some words were said. we won't go any further. Why is your podcast called The Art of Ramble?
We decided that to have a loosely structured podcast would be best for us, because we sort of
like so many different things,
and we jump around, and we just get really excited when we're talking about topics which remind us of other topics, and we bounce off of each other really well. So it just
for example, like I think the episode that we did about music videos, somewhere in there's a tangent about like
the death of
people buy do people buy CDs anymore? And we're like on Google, like as we're recording, like you're finding out like what are people buying CDs? Do they even sell CDs? It turns out that they do, but and I think another disclaimer too is when you're making up a podcast, if you want to be on social media and have a website and things, there were a few titles that got thrown out simply because we could not get an Instagram or a Twitter, with that name or anything close to it. So we wanted to be able to also have a name that was pretty simple and memorable on social media too.
What is advice you would give to someone just starting out on their own podcast?
My advice would be just do it. You don't need fancy recording equipment. You don't need a studio setup. You don't need a sound booth. All you need is a way to record yourself talking. Like really and truly, honestly, that's all you need, really. I used to agonize about tech because I'm kind of like a tech nerd, and like I thought I needed the best, the fastest, the brightest, whatever, before I even started. But you don't really. You just need a set of headphones where you can talk into a microphone like next to your ear, or a pair of earbuds that can record to your phone. That's all you need. Just do it. Just get started and do something, and then you learn along the way.
Yeah, I think too, if you have somebody that you can share it with, that definitely helps. The kind of gives you kind of that accountability too. That kind of sometimes you're like, oh, I have XYZ going on, and it's such a long day, it's a long week at work. But knowing that you're also kind of like having a workout buddy, you have that person to kind of be like, hey, like let's go do this thing, and like it definitely helps to kind of have a partner, so to say.
What are the best resources that have helped you to get where you are with your podcast?
So some of the best resources I've found are groups on Facebook. For example, Buzzsprout is the website that we use to host all of our audio. And on Facebook, Buzzsprout has a group where you can go and join, and they're very, very knowledgeable about literally anything you could ask. Anything you could ask in regards to podcasting, anything you could ask in regards to how to use their site. They're very friendly. They're very fast in terms of responsiveness. And I would say that's probably where I got most of my knowledge. You can also find a lot of really good videos on YouTube. The caveat with YouTube is that everyone has an opinion. So you have to sort of weed through some of those opinions in order to understand where you want to be based on that knowledge that you're gaining. But being able to converse with somebody quickly or just in general about, hey, I have this question about blank. And they answer and you're like, wow, that was so helpful. Thank you. So I would say Facebook, YouTube, those are my two.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this girl right here has been my biggest resource because she's been doing it longer than me. Some of the things it helps having a partner that kind of is already tried and made some of the mistakes first, kind of already troubleshooted some of the things, so that's obviously a huge help. I would agree, Facebook, being able to kind of find some of the some communities where people are going to be able to give you helpful advice. I think definitely is huge.
Who are the three people that have been the most influential to do you when creating your podcast?
Most influential. This is a tough question because before I started doing my podcast, I didn't really listen to podcasts. The podcast community has exploded in the last year due to the fact that a lot of people are home. But when I started, it was definitely a lot harder to find information, a lot harder to find people that did it so you could learn from them. I would say my husband. He is a really big supporter of mine. And even when it came to things that I was just like, I can't do this, and he's like, yes, you can. So he's been extremely supportive and still is. Probably my father. My father is a huge supporter of mine as well, and he has been extremely influential in terms of just blanket support. Like, it doesn't matter what I do, really. My dad supports me, so that's really, I really appreciate that as well. I don't think I have three.
I will agree. Both Ally's husband and dad are the bomb. My own mama is pretty good. I know you sometimes will do streams. We started what we call ice cream Sundays. So we're trying for like every other Sunday. You hop on Facebook Live or Twitch, and you just kind of talk with people about whatever. And I think my mother and Joe are probably our two main participants at this point. But it gives us something to do, and it gives us an excuse to eat ice cream. I would say
love that.
And well, I guess this is as a group of three people. There's three brothers, Travis, Justin, and Griffin McElroy, that they started as one podcast, and they have branched out into they have multiple podcasts that they do together. They have their own separate podcasts. They do podcasts with their wives. They do a Dungeons and Dragons one with their dad. And they actually ended up right before I started this, like that was what gave me the kick in the butt, was they came out with a book called Everybody Has a Podcast Except You. And it's basically kind of like a how-to guide, you sharing their experiences, their resources, and they're very upfront that there isn't always one right answer. Even amongst themselves, they don't agree about things. So it's and they're always I always find that they're usually somewhat relatable, and it's great. I like their podcasts. I like most of their content, so it's definitely kind of it's a nice bar to try to strive to be as good as.
Have you had any special guests on the podcast, or do you plan on having any special guests in the future?
Yes, we actually just had two guests for our first time on the podcast this past weekend for our episode that we're going to publish tomorrow. So we definitely are planning on having more guests on in the future because it's better with more people. So.
Well, yeah, especially too, I think, like the episode that we're releasing coming up tomorrow. Well, I suppose by the time you release this, it'll probably be out. But we were like, oh, May the 4th is coming up. And, for Star Wars nerds, that's a huge thing. So we're like, well, we should definitely do a Star Wars episode. There's so much you could talk about with that. And one of our friends, Alan, is like, if you want to have a question about Star Wars, Alan can probably answer it. Like it was very hard for us to stump him on Star Wars trivia. So we're very good friends with his fiance, Victoria. So we were able to have them, and it was a great time. Kind of a chance to hang out with friends, but also, kind of share some fun Star Wars facts. No spoilers, though.
I'll look out for that. Where can listeners find your podcast, not mine?
I hope if they're listening to your podcast, they've already found your podcast.
Yeah, promote my own podcast, sure.
Accident. We are Art of the Ramble on all social media. Our main URL is www.artoftheramble.com. And I will let Aly go over where they can find us to download.
So, because it takes a while for audio hosting sites to sort of approve things, right now we're on Spotify and some lesser known podcast listening places like apps. Deezer and Podcaster and Stitcher and all that stuff. We are there as well. But in terms of the broader mainstream things, we are on Spotify. And I'm working on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google Play, that sort of thing. Those take a little bit longer. So.
Well, that was all the questions.
All right.
Thanks for coming on.
This was so fun. Thank you so much for having us.
It was always fun to. Maybe we'll have to have you for ice cream sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to invite Professor McGonagall.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to today's episode of Getting to Know You. I'd like to thank Sam and Aly again for taking the time to talk with us. Our theme song is Getting to Know You by Rogers and Hammerstein, performed by BHMA community member Franklin Nichols. Editing is done by Ben Rosenthal. Creative direction by me, Eman Tuzman-Eagan. Creative support from Indy Katuno and my mom. We hope you've enjoyed the show.